The U.S. is becoming much more radically and ethnically diverse. How will that alter the nation's identity? By Patricia Smith. The Yakima Valley is in central Washington state. It boasts many apple, pear, and cherry farms. That's why the area is known as the nation's fruit basket. It's home to more than 100 sprawling vineyards. The majestic peak of Mount Rainier rises over the lush fields and thriving orchards. In many ways, it is a picture-perfect American landscape. Yakima embodies another American trend. The number of Latinos here has doubled in just one generation. Nearly 94,000 people live in the community. Latinos now make up almost half of its total population. Robert Ortiz, 17, I think that's him right there, has lived this transformation. There are a lot more events and opportunities for Latinos in Yakima, says Ortiz, a senior at Yakima's Eisenhower High School, where he's student body president. Even in just the past few years, he's seen a big change. I noticed Spanish being spoken a lot more compared to my freshman year, says Ortiz, whose parents came to Yakima from Mexico about 30 years ago. People are getting a lot more comfortable. The changes in excuse me, in this farming valley mirror demographic trends in many US cities and countries where the population is becoming increasingly more diverse. In the past 2 decades, 109 countries in the US, counties in the US went from majority white to having populations in which people of color make up the majority. According to a recent report by the Pew Research Center, and those shifts have occurred in 22 different states, from California to Kansas to North Carolina. Monumental shift. America is becoming more diverse, a, and that diversity is increasingly spreading out across the country and touching a much wider group of Americans, according to recently released 2018 data from the Census Bureau. There's no question that the U.S. is growing more radically and ethnically diverse, says Mark Mather of the Population Reference Bureau, and there's going to be really rapid increase in diversity over the next couple of generations. The Census Bureau has projected that white people could make up less than 50% of the US population by about 2045. Already, people of color make up the majority of the population in 5 states, plus Washington, D.C. The same is true for many major U.S. cities, including New York, Las Vegas, and Memphis. But unlike in decades past, people of color are no longer concentrated in major urban centers. They now outnumber white people in 327 of the country's more than 3,000 counties, narrowing the picture to only the youngest Americans. People of color already make up a majority of the U.S. A recent Brookings Institute analysis of 2018 census data shows that among Americans under age 15, white people now make up just under 50%. The U.S. was founded by white English speaking Europeans. The nation has long wrestled with issues of race and ethnicity and engaged in highly charged debates over immigration. So, this shift is game changing. It also has broad implications of the country's economy, its political life, and its identity. This is an important tipping point, says William Frey, the senior demographer at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. He describes the change as a transformation from a mostly white baby boomer culture to the more globalized, multi ethnic country that we are becoming. Several factors have contributed to the shift. First, the past 4 decades, immigration to the US has been highest from countries like Mexico, China, India, and the Philippines. This has been a byproduct of the 1965 Immigration Act. The law opened the doors more widely to immigrants from countries outside Europe. Second, people of color have higher birth rates than white people. And finally, the white population in the US is getting older, and older people tend to have fewer children. Social changes are also driving the shift. The number of mixed race marriages is on a rise. As a result, so is the number of mixed race children. In fact, multiracial and multi ethnic Americans are among America's fastest growing demographic groups. More than 11 million people in the US identified as mixed racial in 2018, a 65% increase from 2000. No country in the world has ever experienced such a quick and dramatic racial and ethnic change. Right now, the US has a younger generation that's radically and ethnically diverse, and an older generation that's still largely white. It's still unclear what it will mean for people of color to become more the majority in a nation that's a large with a large generational divide. So it says to look at this graph right here, or this map right here for more. A snapshot of change. One can see the major social changes that come with this kind of demographic shift. In Yakima, the Yakima Valley produces so much fruit that farmers have long had trouble finding enough workers to harvest it all. The work is delicate and difficult. That's because most fruit must be picked by hand. Starting in the 1940s, farmers found a willing workforce of people or in people from Mexico. Mexican workers began arriving in large numbers to fill wartime labor shortages. In the following decades, many more Mexicans came. They were looking to escape unemployment and economic hardship. At home, initially, many came to Yakima on temporary work visas and returned home after the harvest. Farms expanded and refrigerated warehousing created year-round jobs that led some Mexican workers to remain in the US illegally. In 1986, many of them participated in President Ronald Reagan's amnesty program and offered them the chance to become citizens. Their families grew and became part of the community, and workers from Mexico and Central America kept coming. And that began to change the face of Yakima. Latino children began entering Yakima's classrooms, some arriving with little or no English. In 1999, Yakima's Eisenhower High School listed its student body as 23% Latino and 70% white. Today, those numbers are basically flipped. Eisenhower's present or student population is 73% Latino and 23% white. I think overall in the school, the change is very evident, says Ortiz, the Eisenhower High student. More people are speaking Spanish. We have clubs that are Hispanic based. We do events for Hispanics. And at assemblies, we do a lot more translating into Spanish. Dulce Gutierrez was born in Yakima and grew up there. The daughter of migrant farm workers, she started school speaking little English. After high school, she got a degree from the University of Washington. In 2015, at age 26, she the f- first Mexican American became, sorry, the first Mexican American to be elected to Yakima City Council. When Gutierrez was campaigning for office, she had an ugly experience. She was speaking in Spanish to a group of, up here, students. The young volunteers were preparing to hand out leaflets in a mostly Hispanic neighborhood. A white woman on her porch across the street yelled out, "Go back to Mexico." This moment captured the tension many older white residents of Yakima feel about their city's changing demographics. Issues as old as the nation. Today, new immigrants arrive from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and other regions. They take jobs in fields as diverse as farming, healthcare, and high tech. Immigrants have always played a key role in the nation's growth. From Scottish immigrant Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone in the 19th century, to Russian immigrant Sergey Brin, who co founded Google in 1998. New immigrants bring racial and ethnic diversity, but that can be uncomfortable for people in parts of the country that have seen this demographic change only recently, says Mather of the Population Reference Bureau. It's more in the areas that haven't seen much diversity in the past, Mather says, where there's this culture shock and certain concern, about the changes that are taking place and what that might mean for our identity, our culture, and our economy. In some ways, these issues are as old as the nation itself. In the 18th century, Benjamin Franklin objected to more German immigrants in Pennsylvania. Most of the state's residents were of British ancestry. Franklin feared that his fellow Pennsylvanians would be overwhelmed by Germans. He wrote that they will soon so outnumber us that all the advantages we have will not, in my opinion, be able to preserve our language, and even our government will become precarious. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the U.S. was solidly Protestant. During that time, Americans were wary of the influx of Catholics and Jews. In fact, the waves of Irish, Italian, and Eastern European immigrants weren't always considered white as at the time. So who will consider themselves Latino, Black, Asian, or white later this century? With the upward trend in interethnic and interracial marriages, ethnic and racial definitions may be different in 20 or 30 years. We're headed in a direction where I think the categories that we use today to classify people will become less meaningful, Mather says, because we're going to become so much of a melting pot.